Thank you everyone for joining this meeting today, and we are super excited to have you all here in yet another session of SAIMA, that is Salesforce Architects in the Making. And this is a special session we have organized for all of you, that is CTA, Ask Me Anything. We have 3 recent CTAs and they will be talking about their journey to CTA, the challenges involved, the learnings, the review board experience, followed by answering your questions. So you must all be aware of the format of the session. Most of you have shared your questions on the shared link. We have already considered them, and more questions are there, then please feel free to ask in the chat or Q&A section here. All right, so without wasting any further time, let's get started. If you have already attended previous SAIMA sessions, then you probably know me. And for those who are new to this, I'm Neha. I'm co-hosting this event today with Lilith. I have been working in Salesforce ecosystem from over 7 years now, and I'm currently employed as a team lead at Accenture, where I got a chance to work on multi-cloud systems. And the current project which I'm working on is my 10th Salesforce implementation. And so I thought this is the right time to get certified as a CTA. And as I mentioned, I am co-hosting this event with Lilith. Over to you, Lilith.
Thanks, Neha. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm Lilith. I'm senior developer at Wake. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for, I think, about 3 years, and I'm a certification nut. So I got my prerequisites in July and have been on the journey ever since, but still baby steps. Very slow journey for now. Thanks, Neha.
Hey, I'm
Yeah.
Johann.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Johann. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Johann from Berlin. I started out as an admin and worked together with Unita. She's also in the call for a long time at here.com, Audi Bene, and I recently became a CTA with the help of Lawrence and Jakub.
All right.
Hey. Hi everyone. So I'm Lawrence Newcombe. I've been working in technology about sort of 12 or 13 years, with Salesforce about 7 years. I work for a large non-profit based in Europe. So actually the whole time I've been working with Salesforce, I've been working for non-profit organizations. So that's kind of my thing. I've sort of done bits of everything really, kind of admin, dev, business analysis, and sort of in architecture for the last sort of 5 years or so.
Hey, I'm Jakub Stefaniak. I'm based in Poland. I'm working in IT industry since around 9 years, and last 6 of them I'm in Salesforce ecosystem. And last 5 years I'm building stuff on the App Exchange. Currently I'm technical manager at IPfolio.
All right.
Great,
So
thanks.
thank you, everyone. So as you can all see, we have amazing group of panelists with us. And before we get started, let me tell you in short about the group. We want to support each other in preparing for technical architect certification by creating and sharing content that helps to prepare for the certification. And we are here facilitating small study groups to make room for discussion-based learning. So if in case you have any ideas on what we could or should do, please let us know. Also, there are some housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself in case you have any questions. You can ask them on chat, and we will be monitoring the chat window to get to your questions. And we are not perfect, neither do we know everything. If you spot any mistake, please do let us know. Again, if you are interested in presenting or hosting, please reach out to us. Everybody is welcome. So we have already done the panel intro. Let's get started with the Q&A. Over to you, Lilith.
Yeah, great. So we received a lot of great and interesting questions, but I'll try to go through it and start where I think a lot of us are. And that is a question that we received from Daniel. So he has completed both application and system architects, and he's wondering how anyone should start preparing for the review board. So how did you guys start after you received or reached the prerequisites? What did you do?
Okay, so I can start answering. Like after I finished my both application and system architect, I decided to wait because like I passed them after that time, I think 3 or 4 years in Salesforce ecosystem, and I had no exposure on many real areas, like for example, governance on very big projects. So at that time, I just didn't feel ready for preparing for the CTA. And more or less 2 years it takes me to start thinking about this. Then I've met during last dream for Sebastian Wagner. I've spoken with him. He was a nice guy and did a great marketing. So I decided after taking support from my company that it's a good moment for me to start at the beginning of this year. And the first thing which generally you should do is to start finding people which are on the same level of preparation. So of course, if you are just a beginner on preparations for the review board, you didn't solve any mock yet, then there is no need probably to reach to CTAs or people who have their board in the next month, because this difference of what you have now currently and what you can take from them is quite too big. But luckily for me, at the beginning of my preparation, I met Johann, who that time didn't know anything and I didn't know anything. So we matched perfectly at this beginning level. And step by step, yeah, it was a very nice opportunity to spend next half year together.
Johann, we can't hear you.
No, I would like to add here, what's very important is you need time and money to prepare for the review board, to have that lined up. So yeah, it's kind of a costly expense. So do some basic math. Do you have enough money on the bank account or your company support to pay for like Flow Republic and for the CTA classes and for this review board itself? And do you have enough time, however you get it, to be studying 50 to 20 hours each week for the next 6 to 12 months? Have that prepared ahead of time.
So you mentioned some of the coaching, but you know, this is maybe not mandatory, let's say. So maybe people with slightly less full bank accounts can also join or not.
You are so, the likelihood of failing is so incredibly high if you're not a genius like Lawrence. I would, or let's say if you don't, as Lawrence is the exception here, but if you don't have an internal program in your company, you almost have to do it. I mean, Lawrence, you did it without it?
Yeah, so I guess my sort of route was a little bit different. So so I was sort of working towards the system and application architect until around a couple of years ago or so, and I'd never really realistically thought I would go for technical architects. But I was chatting with my boss, and he's like, "Oh, you should do it. You should go for it." I'm like, no, it's not for me. And he was, yeah, I mean, I really benefited from having someone incredibly supportive who was on my side and was pushing me towards it. And that helped a lot. It just helped with my own confidence, and it also helped with a lot of the practical aspects. Although Johann is, I didn't do Flow Republic or anything quite like that, but I didn't quite do it all on my own. So I sort of, in those kind of initial days, that was sort of thinking, okay, do I even stand a chance of finding the right connections to make this even conceivable? So I was asking everyone that I could really, who would listen to me in Salesforce, and I was kind of just got very lucky. I think got connected to the right person who was, I think, sympathetic to the fact that I'm from a non-profit background and was really keen to support me and to help me prepare for CTA. He found one of his architect colleagues, a very experienced architect who kind of committed a lot of his time to helping me. So so I did it. I didn't quite kind of have that same sort of formal route, but I did have a lot of support from someone who understood the board very, very well. And yeah, I think like the others have said, I think that having that opportunity is makes a real difference. And there's lots of ways that you can get that, but and of course you can do it without that as well. But yeah, for me certainly that really helped focus where I was putting my time and energy.
And if you're talking about, because this is something that I hear from all of you, right? So you have your study buddy, you have your coach, these people who believe in you, who want to take their time and talk with you, go through some topics. How should we see this? How does this support happen? Do you have daily get-togethers, weekly get-togethers? What do you talk about? Is there a structure to it? How do we envision this?
I'm probably a bit different to the others, I guess, but for me, what that looked like was, so the process for me was it was just over a year, I think, between being introduced to my mentor and then actually appearing for the board. Over that time, and we'd actually originally planned for that to be a shorter period of time, like more like sort of 7 months. And we were meeting initially every couple of weeks. He would sort of suggest some topics for me to go away and spend some time reading about, thinking about. I would come back. He set me little challenges, little mini scenarios, things like that, on particular kind of areas. So we might do LDVs one week and then mobile another week, and we sort of went in that kind of recurrence for a while, and then we actually had quite a long break in that period as well. As I mentioned, it was sort of initially looking at it as a 7-month thing. Actually, I kind of ended up having my wedding and the set of board dates that I was planning for what happened at the same time. It's just like, this is not going to work. And I think I made the right choice. I postponed the CTA. And so we kind of put everything on pause, and then kind of what I sort of think of as the real preparation period for me was that sort of about 3 or 4 months just before the board, where we then started meeting on a regular basis, and it would always be me presenting a scenario and him doing a little Q&A and feedback. So for me, that was kind of the rhythm, really.
Johann, Jakub?
Yeah.
Jakub, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So I would say that the structure of meetings strongly depends on your current situation. And the CTA is not only artificial exam, but generally it requires to have lots of knowledge to be able to pass it. So there are like few pillars, and one is to really gather all this knowledge which is covered under this exam. And it's not only about the domain certification, but at top of this, you must really good understand Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, Community Clouds, have some overview of Heroku, of Marketing Cloud. So there's lots of stuff which you have to learn. And then when you have this basic knowledge, you can start preparing for the final review board. So if you are already an expert in all of these subtopics, then just for meeting to preparing for the artificial exams, I would say that meetings on the weekly basis are good enough, because it's perfect to work in a small group, like 3 or 4 people, when one person, like all people are solving the same mock, but one person is presenting and the rest of the group is making Q&A session. But if you are not an expert in all of these subtopics, then probably you would like either to spend time on your own on studying it, or in our case, we found beneficial to have daily meetings to just discuss these general areas. And for example, we had 1 week about Sales Cloud, another week about Service Cloud, and so on and so on.
And those were sessions between you and Johann, right?
That's correct, and 2 other guys.
Yes, so this is something I would add there. The group, 2 people can be too small, because if one of them, for example, I dropped out for 2 weeks, I had something similar to a burnout at some point. I hated Salesforce after this. So the others kept on going. So maybe a size of 3 or 4 people, I would say, is optimal. Don't make it bigger than 4 people. Then it becomes not a group anymore.
Yeah, you have to have some accountability probably, and that's easier with a smaller group. It's noticeable if someone's not there.
Yes. And we had, I think Jakub took over the role as a group leader, kind of. You have to have somebody who sets up the meetings, texts me if I'm not showing up, asks, hey, are you joining today? Stuff like that. I think it doesn't happen by itself, I would say, for most people.
Do you find the group if you are not on Flow Republic? So how did you do that?
We found each other on the Architect Trailblazer community. I found the post a couple of months ago. My first post, it was in April. So I'm looking for a study partner. And then Jakub replied.
And I would suggest that, there are lots of people thinking about preparations for the exams. And the only important topic is how to find people which are on similar level of commitment and preparations. And I can imagine that there are people who are on the road to CTA for 10 years and they are not even closer because like it's easy to speak about it. So if you have problems to find study partners, try to be a little bit more proactive. Don't say that you are just looking for somebody generally to speak about CTA, but say you would like to go with somebody this and that particular mock exam because it's showing that you already have this basic understanding and you want to discuss laptop to school solutions. So it's very concrete stuff. And like for this other folks with our group, even in Flow Republic, you have lots of people. And in our case, like both of them are not, didn't started with me, just in different, how Sebastian called it, cohorts. And I just met them on the Slack channel when I was looking for somebody to go through some other mocks together.
And additional there, I posted the same question on LinkedIn, and this is actually how the SAIMA Group got started.
Oh, that's really, I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yes, this is how it actually started because I posted it and I got about 100 or 150 likes and comments, and I was, apparently we have to do something there. So like Jakub said, be specific. Okay, and find people who are as different from you as possible. If you Yes, if you're a developer since 10 years and you study with your colleague who sits right next to you since 10 years, you will probably not learn a lot because you're already very similar. I found it very interesting. One of our study buddies is from Australia. That the flat renting market works completely different there, just as a detail.
Okay, but those are good things to know indeed, because for, also project experience, etc. Indeed, if it's the same colleague and he's traveled through the same customers as you have, he's run into the same issues. Well, yeah, different backgrounds, you learn so much, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I would like to highlight is you mentioned 25 hours a week. Lawrence mentioned the logistics of wedding planning while doing CTA. So, you know, as you already highlighted, family has to be on board, right? Your close personal circle really needs to be involved or at least aware of the toll this will take. How did you guys manage that?
I can start there. I took the whole year off, so I didn't have to work. So, but yes, my partner had to suffer. I mean, my partner knows now a lot about SAML and OAuth and LDV and skinny tables, because you get kind of crazy at some point. At least I got, and I couldn't stop talking about Salesforce anymore. I think the family still should be your priority. Your personal health has to be priority. You can, this is my personal feeling, but you cannot pass if you're not fit, if you're not happy. So just yesterday, I got a message from somebody who said, hey, I cannot study today with you because my boss gave me an urgent deployment. If you have to be, especially with your boss, you have to be clear. From now on, the CTA is my biggest priority, bigger than my job. Because this urgent,
you made this really clear, like this was a clear cut for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, Lawrence, you got the support from your boss, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I didn't really have any time off work specifically. I think I had a few days sort of just before the exam, but I definitely, as Johann said, it was my #1 priority, and it was like for a few months, work was just this thing that I kind of did for a few hours every day. And I guess I was very fortunate that didn't coincide with any really kind of sort of head-bending projects going on, so it was kind of realistic. I mean, the other side of it is family support was absolutely crucial. Like I mean my wife has just been incredible like through the whole thing, and you know, appreciated that I just have less time for other things really. We have to go out once a week rather than 3 or 4 times a week, and evenings are not always sitting and having a nice conversation. Like sometimes they're sitting and I've got my head in a laptop, and you know, it is a big sacrifice. you know, you should see it, and there's no getting away from that really. It is, and it's something to consider quite carefully as to whether that really is worth it for you and whether you're really prepared to do that. But I think if you know, if you do feel that that's right for you, you know, time box it. Like, don't kind of be like, I'm going to be studying CTA until I'm ready, or whatever. Like, you know, have a clear plan, have a target date, sort of commit to that period of time and to the sacrifices that you need to make for that. But have an end to it, and whether that's success or not, you know, you're going to come out better anyway. But yeah, kind of come out in a way that you really do come out of it, rather than just letting it kind of drag on and on.
This timing is probably something which also helps, you know, make it manageable for your close circle, right? Because they know it's not a never-ending path. There is a deadline that will stop at some point. They will become more important again at some point, and you will find time again for them at that point.
Absolutely, and all of your family and your close friends know your deadline and kind of get bought into it, and you know, you get your 10 good luck text messages on the day and all that.
I thought I'm the only one who constantly talks about my review board date.
But you know, there is one very optimistic aspect, at least in Europe, and I'm assuming that in the US it's the same. During the COVID situation, if you start studying for CTA today, you should be close to the end before end of the lockdown or whatever will come. So it's, I found that literally this year was a very good moment to take break for the CTA, because like the amount of stuff which I have to postpone was quite limited by just other circumstances. And you have next winter, next spring for you. So yeah.
Yeah, silver linings. Okay, good to know. One of the questions we received from Irish, and I think everyone wants to know, there is a lot of content. I mean, I've heard CTAs, I've actually heard Johann already mention, you know, when you go to the review board, it's like you have to be prepared to pass all the domain exam, all the designer exams that day. So it's so much knowledge. How do you remember? I mean, I guess study a lot, but any particular tips?
Repetition.
Repetition.
Again and again and again.
Yeah, there is no easy shortcut, but it's important to try distinguish what is the real information and what is just the noise. And nowadays you have so many blogs, video channels, and so on, that you can spend hundreds of hours on side topics which are not really important, or they are just somebody's examples, thoughts, and stuff like that. So I would suggest that for me, very helpful was to building some kind of the cheat sheets / mind maps. And when I was going through, for example, Sales Cloud and then Service Cloud, I had Lucid chart when I was putting screenshot links, magic words, and stuff like that to just help me. Then when I was repeating the content, I had single page when I put everything what in my opinion was important about, let's say, large data volumes or the Sales Cloud. And then, of course, at the first time, it takes me a week to go through the whole community content. But then after a few weeks, it was possible for me to repeat everything in just one afternoon.
Yeah, and I think just a big part of the challenge is just having, I mean, we're incredibly lucky nowadays to have the designer exams. So there is at least a framework of knowledge that you kind of need to have. And that is, you know, the truth is that's probably 70–80% of what you need to know is in those exams. And of course, there's a challenge of getting all of that in your head at the same time. But, you know, ultimately, if you're, you know, if you've passed a few of them, if you're kind of aware of what's in them, you could already kind of get a sense of what you need to know to get to that level of the CTA. I'd say if you're kind of quite early in the journey and you still have some designer exams to go, you're kind of in a way if you're, you know, already planning for CTA, that's probably ideal, because I think the way that you study for those exams should be a little bit different. And, you know, don't focus on passing the exam, focus on, you know, kind of absorbing the knowledge really. Like, it's not just, don't just kind of try to memorize it all, try to really play it out. I think understand it, like understand why things are the way that they are, rather than just memorizing kind of, oh, you use this for this and that for that. and also making really good notes. Like if you've got really good notes from your designer exams, you're kind of halfway there with your CTA notes. So yeah, I think that's kind of a big part of it, is just getting all the designer exams in your head. The other bit from a knowledge perspective, I think is I think as Johann mentioned about, like, you need core service cloud, sales cloud, community cloud, all of that stuff that's not actually in those designer exams, and no one ever really mentions when in the sort of the Salesforce documentation about what a CTA is. But that stuff is really, really important as well. And I kind of think that sales cloud, service cloud consultant exam should probably be prerequisites to CTA, because that you also need to know that stuff to that level as well. So yeah, that's, it's not like it's a lot, but it's not inconceivable to kind of have it all in your head at the same time.
Yeah, there's 2 follow-up questions I see I would like to answer here. The first is, what is the threshold? Also, how deep can you go? If you take your designer certs, you have to go like 2 or 3 levels deeper than the designer certs ask you. So if you know the OAuth flow from the identity cert, you have to go 2 or 3 levels deeper of knowledge. And how deep can they go? One question could be, I don't say it was part of my review board, what are the possible values of the refresh token in the connected app? You have to basically, I would say, how deep? As deep as you can go. I don't know if Jakub or Lawrence agree there.
I'm not sure I entirely agree. I think I know where you're going. I think you can pass a designer exam without actually knowing that content really, really well. But in my experience, the things that are asked about in CTA, they're all there in the documentation. Like, you're not going to be asked things that are like, you would have to go off and research it outside of Salesforce documentation. I think if you like the trail mixes for the design exams, if you look at those really seriously and you read through and you understand all of the documents and all of the resources there, in my view, that area.
I agree there. Sorry, there is no question which is not part of the Salesforce documentation. Good, agreed there. Yeah.
And the reality is, you only need to know, what is it, like 65% of that or whatever. You need to get 65% of the multiple choice questions right for a designer exam, and that's a lot easier than convincing 3 CTAs that you really fully understand this domain. So it's definitely a different game. But in terms of the breadth of knowledge, I don't think there's, my view is, or even the depth of knowledge, I don't think there's more expected than what's in that documentation.
I would say that, that generally it's not just about studying in terms of memorizing things. The beauty and the difficulty of this exam is that you have to really understand these topics. And if you really understand what are differences and use cases for different OAuth flows, then drawing them or being able to transfer where every refresh token exists and where not, and why it's not existing on, for example, JWT, it's kind of the natural consequence of the fact that you understand this topic. And if you will try to just memorize, it's going to be crazy. But if you're starting to, let's say, the main part is that we are going to have either a mentor or a study buddy. And if you are starting asking a good questions, if you do not understand something, it's a moment when you can change your mindset. And it's extremely helpful, because then the whole studying process is not going to be painful, but you can start enjoying it.
But maybe then, if I understand correctly, if I look at the response you gave, Johann, with regard to knowing the parameters, actually, if you know the flow, like you really understand why am I doing, is this actor going to that actor, and getting that information back, just really understanding, as Johann and Lawrence, Jakub and Lawrence already mentioned as well, already to some extent answers the parameters you mentioned, right? If you know why they are communicating and about what, it probably means that you understand it, and then implicitly, most of the parameters as well, so no?
There's 2 things. There's the understanding, I agree, and sometimes there's just weird stuff you just have to brute force memorize. I mean, there's the famous 26 limits, or what's the maximum number of criteria-based sharing rules you can have, Jakub? And how can you extend them? Okay, so there's, or this data model, the Sales Cloud data model at some points makes no sense. Also, like I still don't understand why the certain objects are not connected, or why there's a lookup relationship and there's a manage detail. Some stuff you just have to memorize. Or what's the maximum attachment? What's the maximum file size of a video you can upload with the Salesforce mobile app?
It's 100 megabytes and it's kind of obvious. Everybody knows it.
And the maximum size of email to case attachments.
Yeah. But there are some magic numbers, but it's not so bad. Like, I really appreciate in this whole exam that comparing to other Salesforce exams, I know people who have like 25 plus sales, and generally when I'm trying to ask them about something from, I don't know, Marketing Cloud, they answer like, I don't really know because I passed this exam 2 years ago. I didn't never use Marketing Cloud and I don't remember nothing today. And with CTA, you cannot be like that. Like after you pass the CTA, I'm assuming that if Lawrence will have to go for another mock tomorrow, he's able to do this, right? You are not going to just lose this knowledge because the whole learning process is helping to maybe forget how many rules can you put on the object, but it's different story.
And yes, there's one question. Do we have to remember everything from our head? Yes. You cannot look up, you cannot Google, you have to memorize everything for one day.
So yes, we understand those are the platform specific things that we have to remember. But say, for example, in my overall experience, I worked in Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, even Community Cloud, but I have not worked on Marketing Cloud. If some questions are coming on basis of Marketing Cloud, maybe I'm looking at the help.salesforce or documentation sites to learn about them, but I would be only knowing the theory of it. I would not actually know the architect specific or point of it. So how do you tackle those? Because it's not possible for one person to work in all the projects and have real life experience out of it.
Sure. So the good news is that I've never seen Marketing Cloud on my eyes. And the level which you should understand is what are the Salesforce limitations, because the whole exam is really Salesforce centric. When you are starting to draw your system landscape diagram, you are always putting Salesforce in the middle on your paper/slide. And you should be able to understand and identify what are the limitations when you cannot just send, you are going to send email alerts from Salesforce, but you are starting to have either technical limitations or use cases that you have to go with some different solution. And of course, Marketing Cloud usually is going to be a good answer, but if you want to go with App Exchange, you can go with App Exchange, but you should be able to say that definitely you cannot leave it just to Salesforce because you will have very ugly failing production org.
There's even a similar question in the chat, which is real life experience. I think, Neha, this is what you mean versus theoretical knowledge. At least most of my CTA knowledge is theoretical. And I think this is fine because the theoretical knowledge is still real knowledge. I mean, if I got it via reading the documentation or if I got it by having a project and failing twice, I think it's the same outcome. I know what to do now. Lawrence, what do you think?
Yeah, I think everyone, well, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this. I would guess everyone has areas that they have never worked with or they've only worked with at a really high level. And I would say the same. It's like there's parts of Salesforce that I understand extremely well, but I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in probably even most of it. And you kind of need to know where the things are that I think the most efficient use of your time really is to know where you don't really need to put a lot of effort in because you just already have that from your experience. And then, as Johann says, you can learn about. I think there's probably a few exceptions, but most of the knowledge that you need for CTA, you can just sit there and learn if you need it. And as I say, I think almost everyone will have areas that they just need to kind of sit down and learn it. I think also, Neha, you mentioned specifically about Marketing Cloud, and I think Jakub, in your answer, you kind of talked about Salesforce, and I guess just to sort of just to kind of make it a bit less ambiguous. My understanding when you said Salesforce there is you're thinking Salesforce platform, so like core kind of Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, kind of force.com kind of Salesforce platform stuff. And I think like that you need to be an expert in Salesforce platform, no doubt about it. Like you need to know everything going on there on the back of your hand, because you are a technical architect for Salesforce platform. Yep. Technologies like Marketing Cloud, Einstein Analytics, Heroku, like things that are part of the Salesforce ecosystem but are not core platform. I think you you know, there's sort of levels of knowledge, and that's, you need to understand, as Jakub described, you need to understand the capabilities. You don't need to be an expert in those things. And I don't think you even really need to have ever used any of them. You just need to know about them and what they're for and what they're good at and what the limitations are.
Yeah, one question that I see in quite a few questions from the audience coming back is, you know, backgrounds. I think, Johann, you mentioned already that your background is very different from Jakub's, and also about, you know, the timelines. People are asking, can I do it in 3 months? Can I do it in a year? Can I do it in so many years? I have so many years experience. How does this add up? So how would you answer those kinds of questions with regard to timing and background? How much of an impact does it have? How would you let it influence your journey?
I would say that if you are literally working on all of these core clouds, so we are doing sales, service, communities, and generally pre-sales architecture, so you have all the knowledge which we are assuming that you have to know, and you are just going to start doing mocks and preparing for the review board, maybe 3 months is possible. From the other hand, there are, as you know, on Flow Republic, the coaching program is designed for 6 months and depends on how much time you can put. Some people take more time to finish it. I know that in some consulting companies, the internal CTA programs are even designed for 2 years. So it strongly depends on how much time you can put and what is your current background. So there is no like easy answer. You should start with understanding what is this exam about. And I think that meetings like that or some blog posts can give you a very good overview what we are talking about. You can just download one mock, see one recording with the solution, and it's your final goal. And you have to just compare where you are and where you should be. And this is going to tell you, is it 3 months or 2 years for you?
Yeah, and also which areas are very, very difficult and are therefore gaps you should focus on, right?
Definitely.
We didn't mention that yet. The technical in this certified technical architect is a little bit misleading. It's not a real technical architect. So I just did the analysis recently from a standard, those Galaxy cars and trucks scenario. 80% of the requirements are solved with configuration. And if you solve something with Apex or Lightning, you don't have to know how to program it. You have to understand what a controller is or how an API callout works in principle, but that's it. So you don't have to be a coder. You don't have to have a master in computer science. As my personal opinion still is, a business person has it easier. Also a pre-sales sales consultant who has no developer has it easier than somebody who has been working on an ISV package for the last 10 years. Just as a really rough opposites.
Yeah, and I think, I guess we've talked quite a lot about like knowledge, and it's like, for sure that's important. There's just stuff you need to know, but I think probably I would think the hardest thing to develop if you're not already comfortable with this area is communication and presentation and being able to kind of engage with people, like think on your feet, change your solution. Read somebody else as well, like understand kind of what they're suggesting, what to pick up on, what might be trying to mislead you. You know, there's a lot of just, I guess, kind of, as Johann says, kind of the sort of stuff that if you've worked in roles where you're doing a lot of kind of, I guess for a consultant, a lot of client-facing things or business analysis sorts of roles, like you get very good at those things. But it does take I think it takes, those skills are quite hard to develop, I think, on demand. And I would think that's probably the hardest thing, that if you're not already comfortable in those areas, probably the hardest thing to develop.
Yeah, so if you're a developer who doesn't have much client contact, start engaging with the community, start presenting, start doing networking. For example, you have to network a lot during your preparation. This is something you actually have to know how to do. It doesn't come naturally. And there's the follow.
You have a very interesting approach to your network too, because you're just a go-getter, right? If you have a question and you know someone in your network who might know the answer, you just have you don't hold back, you just ask. And that's a really cool, approach or attitude to have.
I think we are in the Salesforce community. We help each other, and so far I never got. As a worst case scenario, you get no answer. It's a lot like I don't know if when I was young I did hitchhiking. Maybe this is coming back from this time. I know it doesn't exist anymore, but when 10, 15 years ago it still existed. And hitchhiking, you have the same. It doesn't matter how many cars pass. It only matters the one car which stops. You do the same.
Take every opportunity you can get is what you mentioned, right?
Yes. Yes. And I personally, for example, I prefer when people write me a specific question on LinkedIn rather than say, hey, how are you doing? Because what do I do now? Like rather send me the question immediately, then I can decide if I can answer that.
Okay,
so maybe I'm very German about that.
No, but I think maybe it's also the training that you did for the Q&A, because for Q&A also you just have to answer. You have a clear question, clear answer. So that's the same approach you should use when networking.
Yes. And there's somebody in the chat just coming up. There is the requirements of Salesforce 5 years implementation experience, 3+ years experience as an architect, and 2 years of experience as a of a Lightning platform, whatever. I think these numbers are guidelines, I would say. Jakub, how many years of experience as an architect do you have?
It depends. Probably in terms of this exam, I should answer 0, and I'm still not working as an architect. Like, you know, I'm doing architecture for the app exchange, but working in product companies is totally different. Like, end of my world usually are our product manager or CPO of my company. And so we are not like doing the standard consulting when you have, I don't know, stickers on the walls. I'm working remotely since last 6 years only. So it's a little bit different world. And again, from the other hand, internally in the company, I'm doing the architecture from our product. And I think Salesforce didn't make a great job with specifying what really architecture means. You know, for example, the word admin, like admin usually in computer science, the guy who is, I don't know, creating users and uploading data to the system. And in Salesforce, admins are people doing flows. If you are doing flows in terms of computer science, you are a developer generally. And with architects and this technical architect, again, the wording is not perfect.
I also have 0 years experience as an architect. I still don't work as an architect yet. So I just have to study more. That's it. Get a little bit more practice. Identify my gaps. Lawrence, you have been working as an architect. You help us out here.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, yeah, I've certainly been working in roles called architect for quite some time, doing a bit of a mixture of things. But yeah, I guess a reasonable amount of architecture experience. Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, I do think that that's really helped. I think kind of thinking about, and you know, not just the Salesforce architecture bits of that, but the more sort of general enterprise architecture. So understanding, you know, like what a good system landscape looks like, and sort of how to kind of construct a conceptual data model. You know, how like governance mechanisms should work effectively. And there's a lot of kind of, if you have worked in that world, like even outside of Salesforce, a lot of that is relevant. But I think, as Jakub says, like Salesforce don't do a great job of actually explaining what a CTA is, and I think it is probably more like an enterprise architect than, you know, like a technical architect for AWS or something like that, which is very much about building applications.
Maybe we can be honest here. Jakub and I, we have been lucky that in our study group, we have an enterprise architect. And this is, so if you don't have the knowledge yourself, get in your study group somebody who's an enterprise architect who has almost no Salesforce experience on the other hand. This person probably never set up a workflow in his life.
And that's also one of the questions that we get frequently is, what resources should we, you know, or should we try to look at outside of Salesforce? Because we know you guys dove into the Salesforce help documentations, but outside of that, what should we take a look at on the journey to CTA?
Presentation skill, communication skills. Other than that, I would say if it doesn't say help.salesforce.com, it's the wrong source.
It's
YouTube.
Very sad, but the final thought is that, you know, if you are going to Pluralsight or to latest architect content, it's a great place to start and to have initial contact with some specific topic. So at the beginning, I strongly recommend both of these places. But at the end of your preparation, when you are going into details, documentation is probably the best place when you can easily find all things which you cannot memorize, and it's what you do at the end.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it also partly depends, I think, on what you're really trying to do. I mean, if your single goal is to become a CTA, then probably the best place is just stick to Salesforce Help. I think if you're genuinely trying to become like a better developed architect, there's lots of other things that kind of help with that, and a lot of those are also relevant to CTA. So looking at kind of frameworks like sort of TOGAF, there's other sort of similar architecture frameworks that I found TOGAF very kind of relevant to some of the ways that the CTA board is, or you can kind of reference it, which I think is helpful to help kind of make a justification for a particular choice as part of your solution. I think also if it's kind of easy, well, perhaps it's easy to imagine that everybody kind of is really comfortable with agile processes, but if you're not, then absolutely do some agile training, because almost certainly you want to be recommending an agile methodology, or at least justifying why you're not. Yeah, I mean, I kind of personally found outside resources quite helpful for things like really understanding single sign-on and OAuth mechanisms. I mean, the Salesforce documents are kind of okay, but there's much better documentation out there for sort of the fullness and the clarity of explanations. So things like in particular social sign-on, I think the documentation from Salesforce that I've seen on that it's so high level, and you're expected to know it. I think that's the only area that I'm aware of that I feel like there's knowledge expected which just isn't explained in documentation. And I mean, yeah, I spent a lot of time with the OpenID Connect spec, which I'm not sure I'd recommend unless you've got far too much time on your hands. But there's also there's really good like Mozilla documentation for that kind of thing, like Okta, I think it is, do good documentation around that as well. So yeah, it's all sort of fairly easy to find, but it's quite refreshing just reading things that are not Salesforce documents every now and again.
I want to be honest there. People always ask how I started, and for the first 2 months I did almost nothing else but watch, of course, meet with Jakub, but watch YouTube videos which have the title architect. I literally just searched for architect in order to get a feeling, like Lauren says, how do enterprise architects think? How do they speak? What do they focus on? What are the topics they're interested in? Not so much to learn specifics about enterprise architecture, just to get a feeling for it. I think that helped a lot. And of course, everything from Latest Be Architect, everything from Dreamforce, which has architect in the title.
But at the end, you should be fair with yourself. And sessions like today are good if you are starting and you want to understand what generally this topic is about, or if you are looking for some motivations. But I would not say that you can count watching us today as your studying time, right? It's not your studying content. So it's good to have a good understanding that there's lots of blogs and lots of materials how to prepare, what to do, what is your studying strategy. But at the end, you have to just find time for going through the real exam content.
Yeah, with regard to time, well, time flies. So I think it's best maybe if we move on from preparations to the exam itself, what happened there. We had a very interesting question from Jérôme with which method did you use, or how do you think it would be efficient to go through the scenario? Do you read it first entirely, or do you start drawing? How do you manage this wall of information coming at you?
I can start with talking about what I did. So for me, I've experimented with a few things, but what I found worked quite well for me was, so I had like different color pens, and each color meant something different. So I had like a pen for things that were probably data model objects. I had a pen for integrations. I can't remember, two or three others as well. And as I went through the scenario, I just make notes on like, okay, this looks like I need a contact object. This looks like I'll need a fire and forget integration, like those sorts of things. So I would kind of read through, but I would make those very basic notes on my first read through. And then I would basically go back to the start again. And then I would sort of scan through and pick out from each of those areas and then start to draw my very rough diagrams. And so I kind of had diagrams that I was just doing on like A4 paper, like really, really quickly for data model and system landscape and things like that. And then I kind of transferred that to the artifacts, only after I'd been through it that couple of times. Johann?
I did the first read through. I followed the Matt Morris method, the first read through, kind of. So now I do a first read through where I do not take any notes, no highlighting at all. And on the second read through, I solve and read in parallel, because I found, at least this is my style. Of course I also highlight, but my style is I highlight for the presentation and not for knowledge. Because when I do the presentation, I cannot just read out the requirement. I have to kind of shorten it, and I use the highlighting to know which word I have to say. And it's also for the judges to understand my thought process. And then I solve line by line. So if I have a requirement, I write the solution below the requirement. I add the object to my data model. Since my data model is on the PowerPoint, since my data model is always structured the exact same way, and if I do not have an opportunity, the spot for the opportunity will just stay empty.
So you really like planned it well, right?
Yes,
you know
I have
exactly how to tackle it.
Yeah, because it's always a combination of sales and service cloud with a few custom objects, and if you have more than 6 or 8 custom objects, you very likely have something wrong. So most of the times you always have an account and a contact. If you don't have an account and a contact, it's not a Salesforce solution. So account and contact in the center, for me, opportunity on the right, and below opportunity is quote. If I don't use quote, I leave that spot empty, because maybe later in the requirements, I see, I don't need quotes, I then just add it there. And the same for role hierarchy. I read the actors and licenses, and already from the name, I do kind of a guesswork. For example, if I see the actors, if somebody is called Sales Cloud, a sales consultant, I give him the sales license. But if I later see it's a different one, I change it. So I solved line by line on the second read through, and I didn't have time for a third read through. Jakub, did you have time for that?
I had the time for the third one, but the idea is that it should be a time buffer. So if you solve everything according to the plan, you should have like last 30 minutes, maybe last half hour to read everything one more time, check your solution, and you, in the perfect world, you should do not modify anything, only you are catching bugs. So like if during the real exam, you will have lower performance because, for example, of problems with the virtual machine or something like that, then having just the second attempt, which Johann described, is more than enough to have a good solution.
I think I have the same style as Jakub because I copied from him.
That helps. And then with regard to artifacts, so how would you draw them and present them? So Johann, you mentioned you have this very clear templated way that you reuse that is ingrained in your brain.
Yeah, the solutions are kind of similar, and not only in the CTA, but also in the real world. You always have an ESB, you always have an ETL, you always have a firewall, you always have a sales cloud. You very often have a website, you very often have some kind of data warehouse, you very often have some kind of web apps which you have integrated. Very often you have some kind of Active Directory or LDAP or Okta or ADFS. So these points you already can put on your diagram, like you have spots for them. Because my strategy was think as little as possible.
Reserve thinking time for the important stuff. Okay.
Yes. Did you have a similar strategy, Lawrence?
I think not so much, or not at quite such a level of detail as that, but I did, like in terms of my presentation structure, it was always exactly the same. So I knew the first slide was going to be 2 or 3 bullet points, org strategy, single or multi-org. Is it multi-currency? Is it multi-language? Like that really high-level stuff. Then it's my system landscape. Then it's my role hierarchy. Then it's my data model. And I always had those things. I always had them in the same order. So the first thing that I did when I get in the exam, like even before I start reading the scenario, is I open PowerPoint and I create all the placeholder slides for all of those things. So they're all just kind of ready to go. And then in terms of the again, like the drawing style, like I just knew exactly how I do everything. So that, like, as Johann says, you want to minimize the decision making that you need to do. Like you need anything that is repetitive, like you should just know off the top of your head how you do that. I think in terms of the data model stuff, I don't know if it's maybe like I guess I've done like a lot of drawing data models in the last few years, and that, I guess that side of it, I feel kind of quite comfortable just rearranging things and putting things in roughly the right place and making it kind of readable. So I didn't have that standard structure that I just sort of filled in the gaps. Yeah, but in terms of like the the connectors that I use, the notation for master detail, all of that was all completely figured out. Yeah,
No,
was that?
During your preparation, you are going to solve at least 10 mocks, probably 20 or maybe 30, whatever. But it's your time to find the good template and good strategy, and at the end you have to just find something which works for you and follow exactly the same path during your real exam.
And I know that Jakub and Johann, you did your exams virtually. Lawrence, you did the boards in person, but you were one of the last ones probably to do so. So Johann and Jakub, you did the artifacts completely in PowerPoint, correct?
That's correct. And I found it very useful because theoretically drawing in PowerPoint is a little bit slower than drawing by hand. But when I was initially drawing stuff by hand, I found that, it's not always only one diagram. You are making first sketch of a system landscape, and then after the reading the second time, you are going to do it one more time because you had some changes. And I found that, for example, I'm usually forgetting about parts of the models or about some connections. So I was more disappointed with this final drawing by hand, comparing to the fact that I have to draw every diagram at least twice. It was for me at the end not much longer to draw them directly in the PowerPoint, because in PowerPoint you can just modify them on demand.
Yeah, makes sense. Johann?
Again, here, I agree with Jakub, and I think our style is correct. Of course, no. But do whatever, decide on the beginning of your journey for one thing and do nothing else. This is, I think, my one recommendation. Whatever you choose, do it and stick with it. I think the same was true for at some point I thought about changing my standard system landscape, and I thought, no, even if the new one would be better, just stick with it. Stick with the strategy. What do you think, Lawrence?
Really polish it, get used to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine evolved a little bit, but not close to the exam. Yeah, the last sort of probably 4 or 5 mocks that I did, yeah, the structure was just exactly the same. And yeah, I agree. I think it's just good to, like, you want to know it inside out. You want to be in a position where, like, in the most stressed you could possibly imagine, you can still just, like, it's so burned in your brain that you can't possibly get it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
And you drew them digitally as well? Or you drew them by hand, your artifacts?
I did kind of a mixture. I had slides for each of the sections, but my my diagram slides were just placeholders, so they were sort of a prompt for me to kind of talk about the diagram on the wall. So I did like a hand-drawn data model, hand-drawn system landscape, role hierarchy, I think deployment, deployment diagram. And then everything else was bullet points in slides, or just, I mean, I also just read through the scenario and described what I was going to do for each of the requirements.
And did any of you need to revisit the artifacts during the Q&A, for example, need to make some changes? And did you just on the spot, or did you like said, I would do this or that?
You talk, this is, I think, one of the misconceptions. people have, that I will, if I practice enough, I will not have any mistakes. Everybody will have mistakes. This is something Seb told us at the beginning. Especially the data model, none of you will have perfect, because you talk through your changes. You cannot change them anymore. You say, also in my case, I missed a complete object. Happened, and then I was reading the requirements, and then I missed that object. I add that object here, and I talked through all the implications. But that's it, I think.
And it works very well with having the PowerPoint diagrams, because then, like, I had exactly the same situation, that I had some small changes in your data model, and it was like about adding a connection line or removing it. But in the PowerPoint, it's just one click of the mouse, and this was like end of my Q&A session was that I click delete, one line disappear. I just hear that all guys are putting some notes on their keyboard, and it was end of time. So it's magical experience.
So you actually changed it? I just talked through it. Lawrence, did you change it, or did you talk through it?
Yeah, I had probably quite a more significant change. So I proposed to use CPQ, and
you're bold.
During the Q&A that that a better solution was, that there was a better solution that didn't involve using CPQ. So as you probably know, so CPQ has kind of quite a big impact on data model. So there was a lot for me to rethink kind of there and then. And yeah, so my data model ended up looking quite different after that. Yeah, but I was just sort of, I was changing lines and things, drawing objects kind of during the Q&A process. But yeah, I think just the, you know, the most important thing, I think, if that kind of thing does happen, is that, and you know, and as Johann said, it will happen. Like there's gonna be things wrong with your solution. I mean, it's just not really possible to write a perfect solution in the time that you have allowed. And I think so much of doing well in the exam is being able to understand the implications of changing something. And if you change something, you know, don't be afraid to, because that's during the Q&A, changing something significant is probably I would think probably the most risky moment where you could really throw the whole thing away. So yeah, I just suggest if you find yourself in that position, like really take your time over that portion of the Q&A, because you need to you need to be so confident that the change is the right change and that you've thought through all of the implications of that change.
I would say this is something a lot of people skip kind of in their preparation, and we did it a lot at the end. Prepare how you're gonna change your solution. Prepare for that moment. Again, I had whole sentences prepared. In the light of the new information, I changed my solution to blah, 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 with the following implications, blah, 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 blah. I considered the following alternatives, blah, 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 blah.
And again, it's probably reduced your stress level because you knew you were prepared to do this.
Yes. You don't want to be caught off guard. You will be, even if everything would be perfect, the judges would ask you to change something just to see how you react.
Yeah, okay, so that's indeed very good to be prepared for then. And there is a question with regard to the level of detail that they go through in the Q&A. So yeah, how nitty-gritty were their questions?
It depends on your solution. If you have like big mistakes, probably you can expect just questions about your solution, because you will be fighting for them getting enough points to pass. But especially if your solution is good, you can expect many very unique questions. And it's like, you know, you're having 1 hour of Q&A, so they are going to deliver you this amazing experience for 1 hour usually. And then the questions can be very, very unique. But you know, at the end, everything you can find in the documentation. So it's just how good you are with memorizing all these details.
Yeah, they can literally ask you on the which setup button you find something to set up, and what is available in the metadata API and what is not, and everything they can ask you.
And I assume if you don't know, then that's fine. They don't expect you to answer each and every question. They just want to make sure that you're confident and that you don't, you know, just spit out anything just to give an answer, correct?
Yeah, Lawrence, how did you handle the not I don't know part?
So there was, I think, well, I guess just the first thing is I think you would be very unlucky to get a lot of that level of like really obscure kind of questions. I think it can definitely happen. I don't think I got anything quite that mean, but I did get some pretty tough detail sort of specific questions. But a lot of the Q&A is that they are, you know, they will ask you about quite high level things, and there's certain things that just will almost always come up. So you'll almost always be asked to draw out an OAuth flow and or a single sign-on flow. Yeah, you'll typically be asked, you know, to expand a bit around elements of your solution that you've proposed, and so there's bits that are just going to happen, and then there's kind of that detailed stuff is always below that. I think there was probably only one question that I had that I didn't feel comfortable answering, and I asked for the judges to ask me again further into the Q&A. Which they did, and I still couldn't answer it. Yeah, so that's yeah. I think that's
you had,
yeah.
Yeah, I also had the situation, I think after 10 or 15 minutes on a specific topic, I couldn't answer the question of the judge. I still don't know what the judge wanted to hear. I had to ask, can you please leave me alone? Can we please switch the topic? I said it in a nicer way. Again, I prepared a couple of sentences how to say, I don't know. And I would say this is some learning we had with in our mock exams. The worst thing you can do during the Q&A is give an answer where you're not comfortable explaining. Let's say you're not comfortable with enterprise territory management, and you give that as I change my solution to enterprise territory management. The judges will immediately jump on you, smell blood, and will kill you for the next 30 minutes on enterprise territory management.
Is this a similar risk when you introduce, for example, Salesforce products into your solution that you don't quite know that well? Do you expect them to also maybe jump on it, ask you really to explain what does Einstein Analytics do and how does it work if you propose this in your solution?
At least I got detailed questions on Einstein, also Tableau CRM, as we call it. No,
sorry.
I was so proud that I said it during my presentation, during my review board. I think it was renamed the same day or the day before. I was asked very detailed questions, how the data flows, how to get the data in. You're supposed how to know how to do security, how to do sharing, these kind of limitations, multi-org strategy, single org strategy. I mean, I never touched Einstein Analytics. Not never, but I never said any project, but you can be expected to know it. So only suggest where you feel comfortable explaining it to at least 2 or 3 levels deep, I would say. Jakub?
Definitely, you should be able to explain why you are picking this specific product and what are benefits and cons of using it. So in terms of, let's go back to this marketing cloud, always you have some alternatives. And if we are talking about only sending some transactional emails, then you can do it from Salesforce. If you are just sending lots of emails, but it's more like not pixel perfect stuff and more transactional, then probably I would go with the Upper Exchange solution because only the limit of emails per day is my pain. But if then I have to pixel perfect requirements or additionally I have some customer journey, then it's a moment for going to Marketing Cloud.
Yeah, Lawrence, your experience on this?
Yeah, I guess maybe I got quite lucky. I didn't get any what I would describe as really detailed questions on technologies that were not Salesforce. I think there's general things that you really need to understand extremely well. So things like kind of integration mechanisms. Yeah, and as Jakub says, like the high level capabilities of the products sort of external to core platform. But yeah, I personally wasn't asked anything really detailed about anything other than Salesforce, or what I would kind of consider Salesforce core platform. But I mean, maybe nowadays, yeah, Tableau CRM is considered kind of close enough that yeah, perhaps it is more likely that kind of thing would come up.
But would it be then an idea if you don't, for example, have specific knowledge with regard to something like CPQ, something like Tableau CRM, to maybe just get an idea of, okay, a data warehouse or BI tools, this is the general way they work. So it should be feasible with a BI tool. And then that's probably sufficient because it's not core Salesforce.
That would be my view. I think having a 1 or 2 pages worth of notes on something like Tableau CRM or Marketing Cloud is probably enough. But I'm surprised to hear. Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that from you, Johann, that they're asking about things like multi-org strategy, and because I mean that is, you know, if you haven't worked with it, you might not know that.
I also got very detailed questions around Heroku and Heroku Connect, very detailed, which is also mostly around Heroku Connect, but also therefore implications on Heroku. And so I don't know if I would have said, I don't know if I failed, you know, you never know. If it was maybe just fun questions because the one judge knew about it, maybe.
Heroku Connect, oh, sorry, Jakub.
We have a friend who had lots of questions about Quip. So like, it's a big disadvantage of this exam that the exam guide, it's super generic and depends who is your judge, right? If he really like Quip, he can ask many topics about Quip, right? From the other hand, you can just put this Quip because you have a little bit better tool than Charter and you're thinking that it's a safe option and it can be a trap. So you never know, unfortunately.
Yeah, of course. I'm moving on because we're almost out of time, and I have this very interesting question that I saw from Sergey, and it was, which of the existing CTAs influenced you most and how?
I mean, I was briefed by Sergey that this question was gonna come, therefore I prepared. Definitely Steve Bain's people process data. I listened to Apex Office Hours a lot. Every episode, I think, which came out, and he mentions this concept. You really can think, he thinks out loud while he explains stuff, and he very often uses this concept, people process data. So when he thinks about the requirements, he thinks around these 3 elements. This is applicable to org strategy, to sharing, to data model, to system landscape, to integration patterns. It happens over and over. About people process data. This is so Steve Baines definitely, and Carl Brundage. I watched his recording. If you didn't see that yet of the review board, you should definitely watch it. And I personally copied whole sentences from Carl, like word by word. English is not my first language, so I had to overcome that barrier. And so my whole sentence around file management solution, one of my solutions is a Carl sentence. I copied his whole structure, how long he talks, how fast he talks, what he talks about.
So I guess for me, there's a few people. So I think I probably learnt what a CTA was on the Code Coverage podcast, which one of the hosts is Stephen Herod, who's a CTA from Australia, and I mean, it's a great podcast if you haven't had an opportunity to listen. They're both just lovely people, the hosts, and they're clearly would be great to work with. And yeah, and it was like, oh, what's this CTA thing? And yeah, I read a bit about it, and it's like, oh yeah, that sounds kind of interesting. So yeah, that's so certainly Stephen. Kind of on the other end of my sort of getting ready for CTA, there's a guy, Nicholas van der Bosch, who was kind of quite active in the Trailblazer community, and he and I were kind of, we'd just sort of share ideas and things and post back and forth for days and days about OAuth stuff. And yeah, it was so he passed his board, I think, last year, and he was the first person that I had kind of seen kind of go through that process, that was sort of part of the Trailblazer community and then became himself a CTA. And I guess just to have sort of known someone in that environment and sort of seen them as a peer and then see him, oh wow, he's actually passed, he's actually a CTA, was just that was a massive inspiration for me. I think the other person just to mention is Janice Bott, or Yanis maybe. who did some like really awesome documentation on single sign-on and OAuth stuff on LinkedIn, which I spent ages with when I was doing my identity designer exam, and yeah, kind of I've just used a lot of that in putting together kind of resources that I've put on my own website around those areas as well. So yeah, he's again just seems like a lovely guy. So yeah, hopefully I'll get the chance to meet all these people in person someday. But Jakub, how about you? Oh, actually, sorry, can I mention one more person?
Go ahead.
Sorry. And she's not actually a CTA, but she was probably even the biggest inspiration in terms of kind of going onto the journey, which is Gemma Blezard.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree.
Yeah, it's just like
I wouldn't be here with her.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you know, we've kind of mentioned Ladies Be Architects a couple of times, and I mean, they're just, yeah, it's a fantastic group, and Gemma's amazing, and she's just, I think what like she's done that is just really special is really kind of take away a lot of the mystery and the sort of the elitism about being a CTA, and kind of, you know, just trying to show people that actually you don't need to be like, you know, it's not this like expert sort of ivory tower like super developer that you need to be a CTA. Like anyone really can be a CTA. Like you need to kind of focus on the right things for enough time and you can do it. And that's like really kind of what, you know, that's what really has really come across to me from what she's done, as well as obviously she just does great things for improving kind of the representation of women in the architect community, which we need more of. So yeah, she's great.
Okay, so last but not least, I would put on this list Sebastian Wagner. I spent, of course, with him lots of time doing our mock exams, so it was like the biggest influence on my person. But generally, he has as well lots of very valuable content from his Dreamforce sessions, from stuff which he prepared for the Flow Republic, and a good place to start. From time to time, you can sign to the newsletter, and he has something like 30-day CTA challenge. So he's sending once a day for the full month some questions and shortly crossing the answer. And it's very nice way how to introduce preparing for the Q&A session.
Yeah, I've seen those, and indeed, I think you all mentioned some pillars in the CTA world, so really good to look them up and yeah, get inspired. And then maybe a final question, because we're really running out of time. So what is life after CTA?
Johann?
Not so much different, honestly. I had expected that for some reason everything changes now, and I don't know, I eat healthy and do sports and whatever, but I still have to do the dishes, and not so much changed afterwards.
Didn't automate that yet, okay.
Now, be honest, it's kind of, I have the feeling, it sounds a little bit weird, but it's kind of a golden ticket. Suddenly, literally everything changes. So if you're a little bit off put by all the effort you have to put in, it's worth it. Whatever you do afterwards, you can lose the certificate. I looked up how you can lose it. If you let your required prerequisite lapse, then you lose the CTA according to documentation. Again, I was not trying it, but everything changes. Like people approach you differently, headhunters talk to you differently, interviews run differently. And the experience itself is very cathartic, I would say. As you have endured this 6 or 7 hour review board. There's not much which can stress me now, I would say.
Okay, so you passed already your maximum stress level. Everything else is really chill from now on.
At least I hope so.
I wish it for you. Okay, Jakub, Lawrence, how's your life after CTA?
Yeah, probably same sorts of things. It's so I guess I found myself spending the time that I was previously spending on CTA. Like now I'm just like, you know, about 3 weeks after the exam, you know, I'd done the letting my hair down and doing a lot of kind of relaxing, and I'm like, oh, like kind of quite fancy getting into a bit of a bit of a project that I'd started a while ago, and I mean basically since then I've just been doing probably at least as many hours as I used to do on CTA, just like building my open source application. So work on maintain an application called Formula Share, and also doing other sort of open source development stuff with the Salesforce.org team that's sort of behind the nonprofit success pack. And yeah, just kind of getting involved in other Salesforcey things basically. And one day hopefully that will end, but it didn't end for me at the end of CTA. But yeah, I think just so yeah, that's kind of my, I suppose, how I spend the time that was previously all dedicated to CTA. I think as Johann says, like it just, I think it just kind of changes your prospects in terms of like freedom, really. So actually we're my wife and I are planning to move to Thailand in the near future, and like that, you know, and I'm going to be initially at least continuing in my current role, and that's all fine. But you know, it's sort of getting to understand this situation of, well, I might be in this country that is, you know, it doesn't have lots of Salesforce partners, and will I have something to do? And I'm like, well, I'll probably find something to do. And I think just having, you know, having that kind of level of freedom of just feeling like you're probably going to be okay as a career is, yeah, it's not something that I felt before CTA, I guess. Yeah, Jakub, how about you?
I would say that the best thing about CTA is the fact that you can still spend lots of time on studying, but you can start picking again what you are going to study. And like during the 6 months of preparation, I had the full tail of topics like, I don't know, second generations of packages or Salesforce DX, some nitty-gritty details, which I found that I don't know as good as what I would like to know, but it was not part of the review board. So I just put it on the backlog and these topics were waiting for me. And now I had time to go back to all of them. So it's so nice to, you know, again, be able to pick what they are studying. And at the end, I'm still working in the same company because I had a very good support from my supervisor, and I have like not planning to change it in the near future. But definitely there is a change in the kind of the job offers which people are sending you on LinkedIn, and in rates again. Of course, you know, CTA offers you being a technical architect in the bigger companies, so it's opening from one hand many doors. From the other hand, in the Salesforce world, if you are ready for being CTA, so you pass already your system and application architect, you can anyway find job very easily. So I would say that it's not a game changer, but it's definitely opening you new opportunities. So at the end, it's hard to say that it was definitely like from career perspective a game changer for me at this moment, but it's very nice to have the certificate on the wall and be after this.
Yeah, okay, so that's, I'm afraid, all the time we have now, right?
Yeah, just left with 2 minutes, which I think we can wrap up with a thank you note or any note from the organizers of SAIMA, Gaurav or Johann or anyone? Mira?
Yeah. Needy. Now, so now I'm 1.5 hours Q&A and I'm done in my brain. Mira.
Yeah.
Mira, thanks Mira for helping us as well.
No, I just want to thank everybody, our 3 superstar CTAs, as well as our 2 wonderful hosts. I'm hoping that everybody found this session useful. It was certainly very insightful for me. So thank you everybody for making this successful. And I'm hoping that this is the first of many such sessions that we can do. Obviously, these sessions are very inspiring. A lot of people on this this meeting are CTA aspirants, and I think hearing from the people who have kind of been there and done that, it doesn't really get better than this. So thank you once again.
Oh, thanks so much for having us. It's yeah, it's been fun.
Very good evening.
You.
Thank you everyone for joining, and thanks guys for taking the questions.
And see you next time.